Jake Thompson was driving home from his night shift at the garage when he saw the red Ferrari careen off the road and plunge into Lake Austin. Without hesitation, the 27-year-old mechanic dove into the freezing water to save the woman trapped inside the car. What he didn't know was that he was about to save Alexandra Sterling, the richest heiress in America, daughter of the steel magnate who controlled half the country's industry. As he performed CPR on this blonde stranger, Jake never imagined his life was about to change forever. Because when Alexandra opened her eyes and saw the face of the man who had pulled her from death, she didn't just see a grease-stained mechanic. She saw the hero who would challenge everything she'd ever believed about love, money, and the true worth of a person. But the road ahead was filled with obstacles neither of them could imagine. Jake Thompson drove his beat-up 1998 Honda Civic along the winding road that hugged Lake Austin, his eyes heavy from another 12-hour shift at Rodriguez Auto Repair. It was 3 in the morning on a November Thursday, and fog made visibility poor. He'd been working as a mechanic since 18, after his father's sudden death forced him and his mother to fend for themselves. The garage where he worked fixed mostly old cars from the working-class neighborhood of East Austin. Jake was skilled at his trade, had golden hands, and could make engines run that others would have scrapped, but the pay was meager, barely enough to cover rent on the small apartment he shared with his mother Maria, a retired teacher battling chronic illness. That night he was returning from an emergency call. A trucker had broken down on the interstate with engine trouble, and Jake had gone to fix it on site. Extra work that would earn him a few dozen more dollars, necessary to pay for his mother's medications. He was thinking about bills when he saw the blazing headlights of the red Ferrari coming from the opposite direction at breakneck speed. The sports car was weaving erratically, as if the driver had lost control. Jake instinctively slowed, pulling toward the guardrail to give space. But what happened next left him paralyzed. The Ferrari swerved violently, smashed through the metal guardrail, and flew into the lake below with a dull thud that echoed through the silent night. The water closed over the car like a hungry mouth, and for a moment, everything returned to silence. Jake stopped his car abruptly, turned on the hazard lights, and ran toward the spot where the Ferrari had plunged. The lake was black as ink, lit only by his Honda's headlights. He could see the car's lights slowly dimming as it sank. He didn't think twice. He stripped off his leather jacket and work boots and dove into the icy water. The cold hit him like 1,000 needles, taking his breath away, but he kept swimming toward where he'd seen the car disappear. The Ferrari had sunk about 12 feet down. Jake took a breath and dove, his eyes burning from the lake water. Through the cracked windshield, he saw a motionless figure in the driver's seat. A woman with long blonde hair, unconscious. The driver's door was jammed, deformed from impact. Jake surfaced, caught his breath, and dove again. With his hands, he began hitting the side window, using a stone from the bottom. After what seemed like hours, but was probably seconds, the glass shattered. Water began filling the cabin. Jake managed to get his arm through the opening, unbuckled the woman's seatbelt, and pulled her from the car. She was completely unconscious, her body limp. The journey to the surface seemed eternal. Jake swam with one hand, holding the woman with the other, his lungs burning from lack of air. When they finally surfaced, he dragged her to the gravelly shore, his heart pounding like a drum. The woman wasn't breathing. Her face was pale, lips blue. Jake knelt beside her and immediately began CPR, pressing rhythmically on her chest, alternating with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He'd learned the procedure during a first aid course the garage had organized for employees. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Jake continued mechanically, praying it would work, that it wasn't too late. His hands trembled from cold and adrenaline, but he didn't stop. After what felt like eternity, the woman began coughing, expelling water from her lungs. She opened her eyes slowly, 2 emerald-green irises that stared at him with confusion and gratitude. She was beautiful, even with wet hair and smeared makeup. She had aristocratic features, the pampered skin of someone who'd never worked with their hands. She wore an expensive evening dress, now ruined by lake water. When she managed to speak, she asked who he was. Jake introduced himself simply, explaining he'd seen her go into the lake and come to help. The woman looked at him incredulously, then at the completely submerged Ferrari. She acknowledged owing him her life, but Jake replied with characteristic simplicity that anyone would have done the same. He was wrong. What he'd just done would forever change not only the life of the woman he'd saved, but his own as well. Because that woman wasn't just anyone. She was Alexandra Sterling, heiress to the Sterling Steel Empire, one of America's most powerful families. And, when she recovered from the shock, she would seek out the mechanic who had saved her, discovering that sometimes heroes hide in the humblest places. Jake accompanied Alexandra to Austin General Hospital, driving in silence while she shivered in the passenger seat wrapped in his leather jacket. He didn't ask questions about how she'd ended up in the lake or who she was. To him, she was simply someone who'd needed help. At the emergency room, while doctors examined her, Jake waited in the corridor. He was still wet, clothes clinging to his body, shoes squeaking with every step. Some nurses looked at him curiously, wondering what this disheveled man was doing there. When Alexandra emerged from the examination room, she'd regained some color. Doctors had given her dry hospital clothes and run all necessary tests. She was physically fine, but mentally still shaken. She found Jake sitting on a plastic chair in the hallway, drinking coffee from the vending machine. When he saw her, he immediately stood to make sure she was okay. Alexandra studied him carefully. Now that they weren't in emergency mode, she could observe him better. He was an attractive man, about 27, with tousled brown hair and dark eyes that conveyed honesty. His hands were strong, marked by work, with traces of grease under the nails that not even lake water had completely cleaned. When she offered him a ride, Jake politely declined. He had his own car, and what mattered was that she was okay. Alexandra hesitated. There was something about this man that intrigued her. His simplicity, the way he'd helped her without asking questions, without expecting anything in return. She insisted on knowing where he worked, wanting to thank him properly. Jake told her the garage's name, but only because he couldn't say no to those green eyes looking at him so intently. Then he headed for the exit, leaving Alexandra in the corridor with 1,000 questions in her head. 3 days later, Alexandra showed up at Rodriguez Auto Repair. She'd called a taxi to take her to East Austin, a neighborhood she'd never visited before. The driver had looked at her strangely, wondering what such an elegant woman was doing in that area. The garage was a low, square building with walls blackened by grease. In the yard were cars of every type and age, most old and beaten up. The smell of oil and gasoline filled the air. Alexandra entered uncertainly, her heels clicking on the stained concrete floor. Some workers stopped to stare at her. It was obvious she didn't belong in that world. She found Jake under the hood of a Ford Focus, focused on the engine. He wore blue coveralls stained with grease, hair covered by a cap. When he heard footsteps, he looked up and recognized her immediately. Alexandra explained she'd come to thank him and apologize for not telling him who she was. She introduced herself as Alexandra Sterling, daughter of Victor Sterling of Sterling Steel. The name didn't seem to mean anything to Jake, who looked at her with the same gentle expression as always. He probably didn't follow economic or society news. To him, she was simply the woman he'd saved from the lake. When he asked if she'd come all that way just to tell him her name, Alexandra confessed she wanted to invite him to dinner to thank him. Jake hesitated. He looked around the garage, then back at her. She was so out of place in that environment, so elegant and refined. He, meanwhile, was dirty with grease, smelled of motor oil, had black fingernails. He pointed out how different they were, belonging to completely opposite worlds. Alexandra studied him carefully. There was dignity in this man, pride in his work despite obvious poverty. He wasn't trying to impress her. or get something from her. When she said the differences didn't matter to her, Jake objected that they would matter when she saw him sitting at the table next to hers, with those clothes and those hands. Alexandra did something that surprised her. She moved closer, looking him straight in the eyes, and said those hands had saved her life, and she would never be ashamed of them. Jake remained silent for long seconds. There was something about this woman that attracted him, beyond her obvious beauty, an intelligence, a determination that came through in her gestures. He accepted the dinner invitation, but on condition that he pay. Alexandra smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a genuine smile, not one of those she'd learned to make at society events. And so began a story neither could have imagined. Two people from opposite worlds, united by a moment of danger and the discovery that sometimes social differences don't matter when there's something deeper connecting them. Alexandra chose a small bistro in South Austin instead of a fancy restaurant, a simple place with checkered tablecloths, where she dined as a college student before her life became a public showcase. Jake arrived wearing the only suit he owned, the one from his father's funeral. He felt awkward, but when he saw Alexandra enter, he realized she too had chosen simplicity. Understated dress, light makeup, minimal jewelry. Her natural beauty remained impossible to hide nonetheless. The conversation began formally, both nervous, but gradually, as they shared wine and simple dishes, social barriers began to fall. Jake discovered Alexandra wasn't the spoiled rich girl he'd imagined. Wharton MBA, multilingual, with clear ideas about the family business. Most importantly, she was profoundly lonely, despite being constantly surrounded by people interested only in her last name. Alexandra was struck by Jake's passion for his work. He wasn't just a mechanic, but a craftsman who brought dead engines back to life. He'd started out of necessity, but had developed genuine love for the trade. When he asked why she was driving so late that night, she confessed to fleeing a party. Another evening where everyone smiled without really seeing her. She'd been driving aimlessly when she lost control. Jake understood immediately. She felt alone. It wasn't a question, but a statement. For the first time, someone had so easily grasped what she was feeling. He, too, knew that sensation. Coming home evenings when his mother was already asleep, sitting in the kitchen eating leftover lunch. It was an unexpected moment of intimacy. Two strangers recognizing themselves in each other's experience, beyond class differences. They walked along Lady Bird Lake after dinner, talking about dreams and fears. Jake confessed he'd like to open a shop restoring classic cars, machines with souls and stories to return to original beauty. Alexandra sadly admitted not knowing what she'd want to do if free to choose. Her life had been planned from birth. Studies, work, suitable marriage. Reaching her BMW, they looked at each other, knowing the evening was ending. Before she opened the door, Jake found courage to ask to see her again. His boldness surprised her, but when he confirmed wanting to very much, she accepted with a smile. Driving home, both felt something had changed. Alexandra had spent an evening with a man who truly looked her in the eyes. Jake had found a woman who'd reignited something he thought was dead. Neither imagined that dinner was the beginning of a story, destined to challenge everything they'd always believed. In the following months, Jake and Alexandra began meeting regularly in discreet places. Drive-in theaters, small restaurants, walks along Lady Bird Lake. What had started as gratitude gradually transformed into deep love. Alexandra discovered she loved the simplicity of Jake's life. His hands that fixed broken things.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
His dedication to his mother. A world where relationships were genuine because there was nothing to fake. Jake was fascinated by Alexandra's intelligence, but mostly loved the woman she was when she forgot about being an heiress. Their idyll shattered when Victor Sterling discovered the relationship. The magnate had always planned for his daughter to marry someone of appropriate social status. A mechanic from the wrong side of town wasn't part of his vision. The first blow came through Jake's work. Suddenly, he was fired without explanation from the garage, then from another, and another. Someone was deliberately sabotaging his career. Meanwhile, Victor presented Alexandra with various suitable candidates, scions of wealthy families, successful executives, all perfect on paper, but lacking what she'd found with Jake. During their increasingly frequent confrontations, her father accused her of madness, claiming that mechanic was using her. Alexandra responded with determination. She began helping Jake financially, giving him money to open a small shop specializing in classic car restoration. The business grew rapidly thanks to Jake's talent, but success brought visibility. The press discovered their relationship. Headlines were merciless. The Sterling and the mechanic, the Heiress and the grease monkey. Alexandra was painted as a spoiled rich girl, Jake as a social climber. Media pressure was devastating. He lost clients. She was excluded from social events. Their pure love became tainted by the world's judgment. During one of these crises, Jake made a drastic decision. In his shop, surrounded by the cars he was restoring, he looked Alexandra in the eyes and spoke the words they both feared. Maybe they should end it. He explained they were destroying each other's lives. It wasn't love anymore, but constant battle. She'd lost her family. He was losing his work. Maybe they really were too different. Alexandra felt her heart break seeing the desperation in his eyes. If that's what he wanted, she accepted with trembling voice, but told him she'd love him forever. They separated, both convinced they were doing the right thing, both destroyed by pain. They didn't know that true love never gives up, even when all seems lost. 6 months passed without Jake and Alexandra seeing each other. 6 months of dull pain, regrets, sleepless nights wondering if they'd made the right choice. Jake immersed himself completely in work, restoring classic cars with almost manic dedication. Alexandra threw herself into family business, becoming the perfect daughter her father had always wanted. But fate has strange ways of reuniting people meant to be together. One spring day, Jake received an unexpected call. A Miami collector wanted him to restore a 1962 Ferrari 250 GT, one of the rarest and most valuable cars ever built. The compensation was extraordinary, enough to secure his shop's future for years. What Jake didn't know was that the collector was actually Alexandra, who'd used a shell company to contact him. The Ferrari had belonged to her grandfather, and she'd kept it hidden in the family estate's garage for years. When Jake saw the car, he was breathless. It was a masterpiece of Italian engineering, but time had ravaged it. The body was rusted, engine didn't work, interior was faded. It would be the most difficult and rewarding project of his career. He began working on it with passion, unaware that Alexandra came to spy on him every evening. She hid outside the shop and watched through windows, seeing his skilled hands bring that machine back to life piece by piece. He'd changed during their months apart, thinner, more serious, but with the same concentration and dedication as always. The day Jake finished the restoration, Alexandra couldn't resist anymore. She entered the shop while he was making final touches to the body, now gleaming like the day it left the Maranello factory. When she commented on the car's beauty, Jake spun around, immediately recognizing that voice. When he saw her, his heart began pounding. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but there was something different in her eyes, a determination he'd never seen before. Jake immediately understood she'd been the collector. Alexandra confirmed the Ferrari had been her grandfather's, and she'd wanted him to restore it because he was the only one who could bring seemingly lost things back to life. They looked into each other's eyes, and all the pain of past months seemed to vanish. But then Jake looked away, remembering they'd already tried and it hadn't worked. Alexandra was direct. It hadn't worked because they'd let others decide for them. But she'd learned something in those months. She didn't care what the world thought. She didn't care if her father disowned her, if newspapers wrote about them, if people judged them. The only thing that mattered was him. When Jake asked about her family and her life, Alexandra replied that her family didn't understand what it meant to truly love someone, and her life was him. Without him, she was just a rich woman, alone in an empty mansion. Alexandra did something that stunned him. She knelt before him, pulling out a ring from her pocket, and asked him to marry her and build a life together, away from all those who wanted to divide them. Jake looked at her kneeling before him, eyes filled with tears and hope, and realized he'd spent 6 months lying to himself. He loved her. He'd always loved her, and nothing else mattered. He helped her stand and kissed her with all the passion accumulated during those months of separation. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances, of love conquering all, of two souls finding each other after nearly being lost forever. He accepted her proposal with all his heart. In that moment, surrounded by the cars Jake had brought back to life with his hands, they began planning their future. It wouldn't be easy, they both knew, but they'd learned that true love never gives up, and sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to gain what truly matters. The restored Ferrari gleamed under the shop's lights, a perfect symbol of their story. Something beautiful that seemed lost forever, but with patience, dedication, and love, could shine like new again. Jake and Alexandra's wedding was the most talked-about event of the year, but not for the reasons one might expect. Instead of a lavish ceremony in a Dallas cathedral, they chose the small church in Jake's neighborhood, the same one where he'd made his first communion, and where his mother prayed every Sunday. Alexandra wore a simple but elegant dress, without the lace veil and family jewels that Sterling traditions demanded. Jake was in a blue suit, the same one he'd bought for their first date, but this time with a new tie his mother had given him for the occasion. The seating was unusually divided. On one side, garage workers, Jake's neighbors, Mrs. Maria crying with joy seeing her son so happy. On the other side, friends Alexandra had truly chosen over the years, few but sincere, and some cousins who'd had courage to defy family disapproval. Victor Sterling wasn't there. He'd kept his promise to disown his daughter if she married that mechanic, but Alexandra had discovered she didn't need his approval to be happy. During the ceremony, when they exchanged vows, there were no elaborate speeches. Jake promised to love her every day like the first day he'd seen her, when she taught him that real miracles exist. Alexandra promised to build with him a life full of true love, away from masks and lies. The reception was in Jake's shop courtyard, decorated with simple flowers and lights creating magical atmosphere. Instead of a $1,000 banquet, there was food prepared by neighborhood women, homemade pasta, traditional desserts, genuine wine. It was a real celebration, where people truly enjoyed themselves instead of playing social roles. When it came time to cut the cake, Jake surprised Alexandra. He'd restored a small 1968 Mustang that had belonged to his parents in their early marriage years. He'd painted it white and decorated it with flowers, transforming it into the world's most romantic car. He gave it to her as symbol of their new beginning. Alexandra burst into tears of joy. In that gesture was all of Jake's love. He'd taken something old and seemingly worthless and transformed it into treasure. The first years of marriage were continuous discovery. Alexandra learned to live differently. Instead of a mansion with staff, a normal apartment where she cooked herself, where she washed dishes with her husband, where happiness didn't depend on what you owned but what you shared. Jake saw his shop grow thanks to Alexandra's business intelligence. She taught him how to manage accounts, invest earnings, transform his passion into solid business. Together, they developed a winning formula. His artisan talent united with her entrepreneurial vision. 3 years after the wedding, Jake's shop had become one of America's most famous classic car restoration centers. Collectors from around the world brought their cars to be restored by Jake Thompson's magic hands. But he'd never lost his humility, his genuine passion for work. Alexandra had found her path. She'd opened a foundation to help inner-city youth learn artisan trades, offering them opportunities the traditional system denied. It was the perfect way to unite her wealth experience with understanding of poverty she'd learned living with Jake. The most beautiful moment came when Alexandra discovered she was pregnant. Sitting in their small garden, hands intertwined and eyes full of joyful tears, they imagined their child's future. The little one would grow up with the best of both their worlds, and most importantly, knowing that true love really exists. When little Emma was born 6 months later, Victor Sterling appeared unexpectedly at the hospital. He'd followed his daughter's life from afar recent years, had seen how she'd blossomed beside this man he'd always despised. And when he held his granddaughter for the first time, he understood he'd been wrong about everything. He asked Alexandra's forgiveness with teary eyes. He'd realized she'd been right. Love can't be commanded or planned. It's recognized and protected. Reconciliation wasn't immediate, but gradual. Victor learned to respect Jake, to see in him not an opportunist, but a man who'd made his daughter happy in ways all the money in the world never could. 5 years after that accident at Lake Austin, Jake and Alexandra sat on their new house's terrace, watching Emma play in the garden. She was a lively and curious child who'd inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's manual skills. Alexandra asked Jake if he remembered that night, pointing to the lake visible in the distance. How could he forget? It was the night that changed his life. When she asked if he ever thought about what would have happened if he hadn't passed by there, Jake took her hand, looking at the ring she still wore with pride. He didn't think about it, because he knew destiny would have brought them together anyway. Two people meant to be together, always find each other, sooner or later. Alexandra smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. He was right. Their love had been stronger than social differences, stronger than family opposition, stronger than the world's judgment, because true love never gives up, and when two souls recognize each other, nothing can truly separate them. That evening, as they put Emma to bed, and she asked for the 100th time the story of how Daddy saved Mommy from the lake, Jake and Alexandra looked at each other and smiled. It was a story they never tired of telling, because it was their story. A story of love that conquered everything. And in that house, full of laughter, true love, and realized dreams, they realized every day how fortunate they'd been. Not for money, not for success, but for finding in each other the right person. That person worth risking everything for, losing everything for, and ultimately gaining the only thing that truly matters, love that lasts forever. Like if you believe true love knows no social differences, comment which moment in the story moved you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in love that conquers all. Subscribe for more stories of authentic love and second chances. Sometimes a heroic act can change two lives forever. Sometimes love is born in the most unexpected and dramatic moments. And sometimes two completely different people are perfect for each other. Because true love isn't measured in wealth, but in courage to be yourself.